Okay, hello. My name is Elvin Razo, and I will be doing my presentation over my English Transition to Final. And so, just to start, the research or my research itself was on the one question of how travel writing influences communication and learning when it comes to people of different cultures. And now, when it came to the writing process, specifically the revision task, my project one research paper was, in my opinion, decent in that, at least in my eyes, it went about all the steps properly and in detail. And the part of my research paper that I was most proud of was the research and analysis portion, in which I got more of a sense on how it actually feels to garner research and analyze it. And it proved to be an interesting topic, and the analysis conducted was actually no less interesting. In fact, it was more interesting. However, something I do regret about my first research paper is the fact that I know I could have incorporated my sources a little more properly and gone more into detail with my sources, and also properly done in-text citations with my sources in my essay. And it also was not fully transparent because it didn't have the research or the answers that my interviewee had given for my interview. And so I at first didn't find this topic interesting or didn't think I would find interesting. However, it did prove to be something very, interesting to do. And the reason why I wasn't going to find it interesting is because I was, unfortunately, due to my upbringing, I was taught that writing is a tool that we make for educational and research purposes only, not for like recreation or creative purposes. And in a sense, this research project was actually, for recreation of creative purposes because it's something, it's really cool. You learn about things and you actually go and get your hands on, and you do your own research and you do your own analysis, and it's just interesting. And so what I did for my paper one revisions was that I basically was more transparent and I included the answers on all of my research or on all of my interview questions. And I also incorporated why I did these questions, how I came up with them, and why I went about it. And so something that I learned about the writing process during this class was that you always want to pick a topic you're interested in because you don't want to do a do a project that's just boring and bland. The other two things I learned was that you need to refer your sources as perspectives and not facts, and you need to share your research data with our readers in order to be transparent. And so the examples I'm going to be using to show this is my revised final essay, my rough draft, and the Penrose reading. And so here I'm going to bring up my revised final essay, which should be this one. No, this one. And so here when we go down, what I did was I not only included the interviewee's responses to all of my questions, but I also discussed a little bit about why I came up with my questions. And so what I came up with is the fact that I made these questions just to exactly see how travel writing impacted them, whether through its importance, usage, and how these effects were important in terms and reference to travel writing. And I also thought about the other applications, such as the cultural usage and its relevance to our travel, and finally, how other media platforms could be similar in resonating unique cultural ideas. And this shows that I learned how to be a little more transparent because here we can see the not only the analysis portion down here, my research essay, and how I analyze my own research, but I can also see the research itself, and so can my readers. And this is very important because it just provides a little more credibility, and it makes your readers feel like, hey, he actually shared this research with us, or and they can do their own analysis portion on that. And because we all have different ways to conduct our own analysis and such. The Penrose reading showed us the need to refer to our sources as opinions and perspectives because it's important that we acknowledge the fact that perspectives are not facts, but instead there's something that's a claim, and we can see this in the Penrose reading when Roger saw his task as one examining a set of alternative positions, and he also references them as each of our authors is forced in the nature to provide investigation actions. And so let me see. It was here. In his notes, definitional features are organized by author. His introductory section explicitly acknowledges the role of author as claim maker. And so here he acknowledges the author as a claim maker, and he also refers to them as, a unique perspective instead of, a fact as Janet did. And so, and finally, my rough draft showed how my interest in travel writing, let me pull that up, rough draft. Here, it shows how I picked travel writing because I was interested in nature. And so this actually was very helpful because I learned that, hey, it's fun to actually do research and writing on something that's interesting, contrary to something that could be like, oh, you have to do it on this topic, and they gave you a forced topic that you have little to no knowledge over and little to no interest on. And that just makes it more a work instead of like an opportunity to invest and, look at this research. And the way I'm going to be applying these things that I learned was that in future work and learning situations, I'm always going to be attempting to work on projects that do research in topics that interest me, because if I don't, then the project itself will be boring, and it'll be just like, oh, this is going to be another work project that I have to force myself to do, instead of something like I can do that interests me and actually expands my intuition knowledge. And I also have to remember to always be transparent, because especially in the higher fields of mechanical engineering, if you don't be fully transparent with your audience, especially professionals who in your field, they have to review your work. They have to make sure that your work is spotless, it's clean. It can't be altered, because this technology, especially higher up in mechanical engineering, it's important. It can either be very good for society, or we overlook something, it can go very wrong. And this is evident in, NASA itself. They have, all of this research that takes people to the moon, and that research it has to be reviewed. And if it's altered, it could mean so much negative things. Secondly, I'm going to go into the research process. And so before this class, my research process was a little more narrow and one-sided, and I heavily relied on previous information, or basically my sources for this information, because I never really did any research to the extent that I actually did in this class. Because the most research I was ever involved in was simply just looking up any source that could either go for or against my project, and then I used them as fact to either just back up or contest any position in my projects. And that was the full extent of the research that I did. However, the 3 things that I learned about the research process in this class were about how there's different ways to do research, how to analyze the results of our research, and how to determine the credibility of our sources. And so the way I did this was through the car sheet, which is right here, the create your own interview worksheet, and the final essay. And so the way these increased my knowledge was that through the car sheet, I was introduced to a way to determine the credibility of sources. And this is evident because it made me question the credibility, as you can see here, the accuracy, the reasonableness, and support of any source. And so here you can see that it asks you if you can identify contact, if it's backed by a reputable publisher, if they're known, if they have credentials, and it asks all sorts of questions to let you know if they're trustworthy, current, reasonable, or supported. And this is important because your work will always depend on the credibility of your sources. And you also want to, present yourself as someone very credible, especially in the field of engineering. The create my own interview research paper, here it helped me show, or help me plan ahead. And so it gave me, the idea of how much people I would interview, who they were, if they were vulnerable or not, so I could know how I could protect them. And also how to protect them. And so here I was going to interview a student, which is part of my research. Um, and they were not vulnerable, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I still wanted to protect privacy, so I only recorded the audio. And we talked about travel writing and the impact. And it also gives you an outline, and so it's something really good because it helps you like organize your thoughts and put them all onto one paper so that you know what you want to ask your interview. And it also came with follow-up questions. And here it helps you plan it out as well. It's asking how you interview, how you will do it, and how you're going to record this interview. And so this just helped me understand that it's very important to know how to do your own research. And there was also the other not examples, the other pathways you could take, which were either the experiment or the observation. They were both very similar. And finally, I have the research paper. Nope, that's not. There you go. And finally, I have my final essay in which I showed about how I went about analyzing my essay, from identifying patterns with my interviewees' responses to acknowledging similarities and differences in our experiences with travel writing, and how to compare research results with my sources. And so here you can see that I did my analysis on the interviewees' answers. I did a comparison of my interviewees' answers with sources, and I also tested it with my own lived experience. And this is important because it shows you how to, analyze something and do it properly. And so what I learned here, and what I'm going to apply in my future work and learning situations, is that in order to successfully go about in creating anything, you need to do extensive research on the topic at hand, whether it be something concerning solar energy, hydraulic systems, wind energy, etc. And these three things that I learned will help me identify reliable sources of previous information and research, help me fully analyze and understand the results of my research, uh, and it'll also help in providing three of many research pathways I can take, either observation, experiments, and interviews, in order to do my own research. The third question was the integrating secondary sources into your writing. And so before this class, what I did, or my process, was that I simply just found sources and added to order backup or combat a claim. I cited those sources in my paper, and then I proceeded to summarize and use that summary in order to elaborate on the support or opposition to my claim or topic. And not once did I ever consider making connections between the source to anything else, or how integrating these sources and conversation over the sources could provide valuable insight into the sources in the project itself. And so the three things I learned about integrating sources from this class would be that we have to not refer to our sources as sources, but instead name them. We had to learn how, or I learned how to link and connect sources to myself, the world, or other sources. And I learned how to test the sources against my own experience. And so the three examples would be my final essay, my our table talk drawing, and the Penrose reading. And so the way they show how I increased my knowledge when it came to integrating sources was that in the Penrose reading, you can see here, when it came to sources, instead of referring to them as fact and as sources, he instead named the sources and gave them a sense of individuality. As you can see here, Conrad sees the problem quite differently. And then as a time of action to Gert and Culver clearly seem to think it does. And that just shows, you need to analyze your sources, and they're human. They're a claim, not a fact. My table talk drawing, as seen here, it shows how when you analyze the sources, you can link them and connect them to the sources, connect them to other sources, to the world, or to yourself. And here you can see this is, let me see, it was twin yeah, here I connected it source to source. Here I connected it to the world, and here I connected to myself. And so it just shows that you learned how to connect these sources to different things instead of just summarizing that one source and saying, oh, well, that's all there is to the certain source. And finally, my final essay, it shows how I was able to test the sources against my own experience. And so we go up here. Let me see. Misleading truth. Here you go. The connection to myself was that I myself had fallen victim to writing stories I heard about Mexico, um, when I went, it was actually something very different. And this was my comparison, or the comparison of the source to myself, of travel writing in children and adolescents literature in Iran by Jalal Amirian. And so it just shows how it's important to connect to yourself, because it puts your own lived experience and knowledge to the test, as well as the source itself. The way I will apply this knowledge in future work and learning situations would probably be that when it comes to actual discussion and testing of other projects in the engineering world, especially to the review and of these projects to research, it'll help me identify my sources as individuals and help me understand that these individuals are human. And because of this, we refer to them as such and understand that humans are perfect. I will also actively encourage myself, or compare my knowledge and thoughts with those of our research sources and other individuals in the field, because it'll help better cooperate and expand upon our tuition and knowledge and share that knowledge and discover its flaws. And this is very helpful in the engineering field, because once you get rid of those flaws, you just have a very good design, a very solid design to use in our real world problems. And so when it came to learning with feedback, or learning with peers and my feedback processes, before this class, I didn't necessarily do that much of it. What I did was, whenever we had any project, each member of that project would just be responsible for their own portion of the project, and that portion only. We wouldn't collaborate on a topic at hand, and we would just put our information and leave it like that until the presentation, because to us, we didn't think of it as, you know, learning with peers. We just thought, oh, we're learning, and then we're just going to do that with peers, and we're not going to elaborate or cooperate and expand upon our knowledge. And so feedback, also when it came to feedback, it was something that you gathered and presented, and then you just read, replied to, and completely ignored or disregarded, because we didn't see feedback as something good. We just saw feedback as, oh, someone's going to tell us their own perspective, what's wrong with it, and we already know this, or it's just going to be not relatively helpful feedback, right? And so my process for learning with peers and for developing receiving feedback improved by helping me understand that everyone has their own perspective, and when it comes to feedback, we can ask for specific help, and that it's possible to explain any idea with only images. And so the examples of the work that showed that I learned these things were at the feedback sessions of ours, the cons reading, and the reading exam drawing. And so the way these demonstrated the things I learned was how the reading exam drawings showed how an idea can be explained by a singular image. And so for the reading exam, I unfortunately couldn't find a picture, because what we did was we all did this one singular image, and then one member of our group uploaded it, and we just had that one upload count for all of us, right? But what we did was we had this little, we used the unflattening book, which was here. Let me Blackboard. Okay, well, we had an unflattening book, and what we did in the unflattening book is it's basically a comic about how to find different perspectives. And what we did was we read one chapter, and our group was in charge of that one chapter, and we had to summarize the main idea in a singular image, and we couldn't use any words. And so for one of ours, we read a chapter of the flattening, and what we did was the idea that, or we drew two different panels. And so the first panel was a classroom learning from a certain perspective, or a professor telling them, oh, this is the one and only way to do it. And so later on, one of those kids shared the same traits with the professor, and that kid themselves was now a teacher, and they were teaching that same exact thing to other students. However, there was this one student in the class that stood out because he had a different feature, and he was questioning the the information being provided to him by the teacher. And so this just showed how the ideas can be presented in just an image. The cons reading, this is Penrose. The cons reading, it showed us how everyone has their own perspectives and how these unique perspectives can expose you to an idea you had never thought of before. And so what the cons reading, or how the cons reading shows us that, is that the cons reading, it talks about research by this individual. However, throughout the entire thing, it was just this one method, this one way, and they just looked at it from the eyes of one person, one perspective. However, it's way different, and it's just missing a ton of other unique perspectives. And that just shows us that it had only one unique perspective, and that was it. And that is important to understand, that different perspectives are very important because it shows you a different part of the picture. And finally, the feedback sessions helped show that when it came to feedback, it was not only helpful and applicable to our research on our project, but that when it came to help, you could ask for help on a specific item. And here we are. And instead of the help being general and somewhat common knowledge, our how do you call it? Our peers would instead directly respond to our own needs, something that wouldn't be considered general knowledge for us. And so here, I learned how to ask for help specifically. And so the kind of help I asked was that I wanted a little bit of help on how to come up with a set of interview questions and how to grasp at the concept of the main idea with these research questions and how to develop my own research questions. And this was helpful because I had I had a peer help me develop these questions, and it was very specific. It wasn't something general that I had already known or that would have been completely disregarded because it wouldn't have been helpful. And so when it comes to how I will apply this in a future work or learning setting, is that in the future, I will always, or most likely, integrate the fact that everyone has different and unique perspectives. And because in the engineering field, these perspectives, when successfully applied in a cooperative setting, they can create a design with minimal flaw because of the scope of perspective that went into it. And in terms of feedback, I will do the best to provide feedback, especially when it comes to someone or something specific, and also to request feedback on specific things in order to help me with my problems that could come up in the design stages of our projects. And finally, when it came to fitting genre to audience and purpose, before this class, my process for writing or creating anything, especially when I had an intended audience, was something I did without actively thinking about that said audience, because I never thought about the actual importance appealing to an audience really had. And so this was evident because when it came to influencing them, I didn't think about these certain things or used specific information for my audiences. And so the process for writing and creating for an intended audience that I learned in this class was developing the use of captions, how to follow others on social media, and how to talk like your audience. And so the examples of these were made my project 2, my YouTube profile itself, and the public speaking video. And so the example of the project 2 videos showed how I successfully utilized captions, and that would be over here. I'm going to go ahead and mute that. And so here, it just shows how captions was actually something very easy to do, contrary to my belief that, oh, you had to type it out yourself, you had to worry about the time frames. And no, it was actually something very simple. All you had to do was upload it, choose a language, and then enable captions, and YouTube would automatically do it for you. And so that was very helpful and something I found out that was contrary to my belief. My YouTube account shows how I followed people and institutions that would not only directly benefit from my research, but also how to follow individuals such as my audience and those who would be able to obtain research and information from. And so here, you can go here and I have my subscriber list, and I had Amrit Sen, Baylor University, Catherine Campo, Rice University, STC, TED, TEDx Talks, Texas A&M, College Board, UT Austin, the Department of Education, UTRGV. And so this just shows that you need to always worry about, sharing research and communicating with people who benefit from your research. Those are those who are part of your research and those who you get your research from. And this is just very important. And so finally, this public speaking video showed us that talking like your audience is important because it invests their interest and shows them that you care about them and you appeal to them because of your usage of similar diction and word choice. And this just helps them realize that, hey, they're actively trying to incorporate our ideas, they're using our diction and in the engineering field, this is very important. And the reason why this is going to be very applicable to the future of my engineering field is that my projects, prototypes, and design not only need to be tested, but they also need to be presented to other professionals and individuals in the field of mechanical engineering. And if I know how to present and how to appeal to my audience, it's crucial because not only will I earn their attention, or their attention and interest in my prototypes and projects, but it's also crucial in earning funding and or selling our prototypes and finalized designs to the world. Because, learning about your audience and appealing to them just makes it so much easier when it comes anywhere near interacting with your audience. And that is my English 1302 final exam. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you. Now to end, I Zoom.